But I wanted to start the series off with a test. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to put a series of pictures up, and on those pictures, there will be two pictures on the screen, and what I want you to talk about is which one of those pictures would you classify as a miracle? So you'll talk to your neighbor, and you'll say, which one of these would you classify as a miracle? So Jess, go ahead and put the first one up. So go ahead and talk with each other. Which one of those would you classify as a miracle? Go ahead and chat about that, and we'll find out your thoughts in a minute. All right, and if you're watching at home, I would love for you to put that in the live stream too. Which one? Put that in your chat. Which one? But okay, so which one would you guys say it's a miracle? Which one would you describe? Oh, both. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. You guys make this hard. Okay. Okay. All right. So I just knew like the lighting. Oh, I guess they both have dramatic lighting coming in. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next one then, Jess. All right, so take a look at that one. Which one, talk with each other, and which one would you classify as a miracle? Which one looks more miracle-ish to you? All right, what do you guys say? The left? Left, okay. I wanted to make sure. Okay, oh, I guess it is on the left of my, but okay, never mind. All right, facing the audience, I have a heart. Okay, left, all right. So you guys see the one on the left? Okay, all right, how about this next one? Take a look at that one, and which one do you think is a miracle? All right, which one do you guys say? The baby? I saw both. The baby? All right, thanks, Jess. So here's the idea behind these pictures. I've really been thinking about this idea of miracle, and for this holiday season, it really got me thinking a lot about it. Because I think a lot of times, if people were to describe like the Christmas season, there's actually some aspect about it that people would say are miraculous, are pretty divine, in those ways. But I've been really thinking about this idea of miracle, and what is it that we look for when we're looking for a miracle? Because, when we think of miracle, we think of things like what? The feeding of the 5,000, right? Or we think about people being raised from the dead, or we think about the blind seeing, or the deaf hearing, or the lame walking. Those are the things that we think about when we get a miracle. I think for our personal lives, we might think a miracle is a check comes in on time to help me pay rent, right? That could be our miracle. Or maybe you get a diagnosis and then you go back and you find out that the cancer's gone. That could be a miracle. Or, well, how about you guys throw some out? What would there be some things in your life or the life of others that you say, man, that was a miracle? What would you guys say? Throw some out. Kids? Depending on the kid. No, I'm just joking. But yes, kids are a miracle. Anyone else? Things that you would consider miracle. Being in a T-bone accident and come out okay. Like, because there's sometimes people go through like horrific accidents and they come out completely unscathed. You're like, whoa. It's incredible when you think about it as well. But now think about this. And take a look at this statement on the screen. And I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. But it's simply this: is what man calls a miracle, God calls routine. What man calls a miracle, God calls routine. For him, miracles are just that. They're just an everyday occurrence. And so this got me wondering, like, how many times do we miss the work of God because we're looking for, quote unquote, the miracle, and God's doing a routine work? Well, if that's just routine to God, what else is routine to God? And are the things that are routine to God are things that we would also ignore because he's the God of the big, but he's also the God of the small. He's the God of all of it. And I think sometimes because when we're going through difficult situations, I think the challenge is if we don't see like big divine movements happening, big works of God and big movements of God, then we have a tendency to think that God is not at work, that God is not moving. We tend to think that God's not coming through, or we tend to think that God does not care because we don't see God moving in such an incredible way or the work in which God is doing. And I wonder how many times do we miss the opportunity to worship and adore God because of the simple fact that we don't recognize, again, that even the small, mundane things of life reveal that he's God. For example, everybody hold up your hand. Wave your fingers. That's the work of God, that you could do that. Everybody stand up. Okay, well, Simon says stand up. All right, go ahead and sit back down. That was the work of God for you to be able to stand up. Everybody, breathe in your nose, out your mouth. Do it again. Breathe in your nose, out your mouth. That's the work of God. I love how Miss Mary puts it. You ask her, how is she doing? And she says, I'm doing great. I woke up on this side of the grave. It's a gift. So how many times do we miss the work of God because we're looking for the incredible things to happen? I love how God puts it. He puts it this way. He says in Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, he says, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And I think sometimes as humans, what we have a tendency to do is we will look at that and we think altitude. And because of being higher, we also think bigness or grandioseness or largeness. And so that way, for example, when we look at something, we go, that's a thought of God or that's a work of God, because look at how fantastic or how incredible that is. That has to be a movement and a work of God. But what if in this passage, when he says, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts and my ways higher than your ways, he wasn't just talking about altitude? What if he was just talking about difference and complexity? That my ways are different than yours. They're different than yours. And I think if we begin to understand that, then maybe what it would do is it would cause us to look at life and look at the work of God differently, especially when it comes to the holiday season and the way that we look at Christmas and begin to think about it. Because I know what I have a tendency to do sometimes, especially when I'm praying for God. God, I'm praying for you to work. I'm praying for you to move. I'm praying for you to do something big. I'm praying for you to show up. And again, when we see God show up, we want God to not just show up, but show out. Right? Like, God, I want you to do. And so I think sometimes the way that we look at the work of God actually is putting God in this. A box. You put them in a box. And so what we're doing is we're looking for, and it's kind of like the same idea of the perfect gift, right? Because we look under the tree because the Christmas is coming, and we look under the tree and we open the present and it's a tie, and we're like, thanks for the tie. That's wonderful. or as a mom, you work really hard to get perfect gifts for all of your family, and you open up your gift and it's another robe, kind of thing. But I began to think about when it comes to our relationship with God and the way that God works, how many of us are guilty of putting God in a box? And we say, God, this is the way that you work. And this is the way that I expect you to work. This is the way I expect you to move. This is the way that I expect you to show up. And then the problem is, what happens when God works outside of this box? And again, usually when we think about this box, we think about the big check showing up, the big diagnosis working out. We think about God showing up in big, powerful, demonstrable ways. It is clearly God that is at work. And don't get me wrong, there are times where he does show up that way because he has the capacity to be able to do so. The problem is, I think we have a tendency to get angry at God when he doesn't show up this way. And I wonder how many works of God do we miss because he is not coming the way that we expect him to. Because I think sometimes we can get, and I've been guilty of this, is that I get the power structure of my faith confused. And so what I mean by that is I expect God to obey me. But I'm supposed to do what? Obey him. I pray this prayer, and God, you are supposed to submit to me. And when God doesn't submit to me and work the way that I want him to work, then I get angry at him. But he tells me to do what? I'm supposed to be doing the submitting. I submit to him. I trust in him. And I think, because sometimes we approach God this way. Like, God, I prayed about it, and because I prayed about it, you're supposed to be at work for me. Because that's the way this relationship works. I come to you, I pray to you, and you do stuff. That's the way this thing's supposed to happen. And so, with that power structure, is it that I work for God, or that God works for me? Do I get that power structure confused? And I think sometimes we do, and we can, because he really is a God that is beyond definition and beyond explanation. But I think it's important for us to understand that not only is he the God of the large and the grandiose, he's also the God of the small and the minute. The same God that created the Grand Canyon also created the soil in your front yard. The same God who created this planet also created the atom. The same God who created the oceans and the waves and the movement of the oceans also created the molecule. And again, how many times do we miss him because we're looking for the planets, the waves, the oceans, and we're looking for the Grand Canyon? We're looking for those. God, prove yourself in that way. And if you prove yourself to me in that way, then I will have faith in you and trust in you. When many times God is not interested in your proving game. He is who he is, and the question is, do you believe him and who he is or not? Because the reality is, he's already proven himself. Multiple ways, multiple occasions. He's already proven himself, but do we trust that? So I was thinking about this Christmas series, and I started looking at how much of this Christmas season and the work of God during the holidays goes against the mindset of man and just how it looks so different. Matter of fact, sometimes people will argue with you about who Jesus Christ is because he showed up on this planet as a baby, right? And how could the all-powerful God who created the heavens and the earth, who moves mountains, creates oceans. How could that God come to earth as a simple child? And some people will use that argument as a reason to not believe in him and who he is. And I think the reason why is because, again, with Christmas, he doesn't come to this earth the way that you would think he should. I mean, we're talking about God, right? So, if he's going to show up on the earth, like, wouldn't it be in a Bentley? You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be, like, I picture, the Pope and the Pope-mobile. Like, or like the clouds parting, and all of a sudden there's a form that descends on the ground, and he stands before you. I have arrived. Right? But he doesn't. And when he does come, like, think about, I don't even know the child's name, but Prince William and Kate, the baby do you guys know? I have no idea what his name is. But remember when that baby was born? And the fanfare and the dignitaries and the pomp and circumstance to announce the arrival of the... You didn't get that with Jesus. Well, I mean, Gloria. I mean, you got the angels, right? I mean, that kind of thing in the fields. But as far as on earth, there was really no recognition. There was nothing that stood out as special that night on the earth to signify to the world that he had arrived. It was so unexpected. And here's the reality, is we know, the star in the sky, and I mean, we know those things, but in actuality, if we're honest, if we had existed back at the time, you know what? We would have missed it too. We would have missed it too. Because it just wasn't what mankind would expect, the way that you would think the God of the universe would show up. And so that's what I want to do. So I've called this series The Unexpected Christmas. And so that we can begin to just dive into those ways. And here's what I'm hoping to do, is I'm hoping that as a result of taking a different view towards Christmas and looking at the different ways that God showed up in ways that are completely unexpected, that maybe what it will do is it will cause us to expand our faith. Maybe it will cause us to look for God in different ways. Maybe it will cause us to, again, look for God in the minute, look for God in the small, look for God because, again, people missed the birth of Christ because they weren't looking for it. They were looking for something completely holistically different. Holistically? Wholly different. So the reality is we could be that same way too. So can we take the lessons learned from Christmas so that we can amend them and apply them to our life and begin to know how to look for God? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with the theme of a favorite song. Oh, little town of... Look at that. DJ was like on it, Bethlehem. It's like, wow. Like, he really loves that song, I guess. But here's what I wanted to do, is I just want to do a contrast between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Because when we look at Jerusalem, it would seem like it would make more sense for the mission that Jesus had. Mentally, it seems like it would make more sense for him to show up in Jerusalem. One of the cool things, and let me say this real quickly. For those of you that are praying for me in seminary, thank you so much. This last semester has been crazy, crazy tough and busy in my classes. But it looks like I'm going to be able to pull off A's in both my classes this semester. So thank you guys, so much for your prayer. And based on that, I do believe in miracles. But one of the cool things about being in seminary is the opportunities for research that you have. So this is a book that I've used in a couple of my classes already. It's called the Holman Bible Atlas, and it's kind of cool. Like it has like all kinds of maps. Like for the people in the back, like thanks, Ken, but it has like all kinds of maps and descriptions inside of it, and so it's kind of cool. So I decided to look up in here Jerusalem at the time of the birth of Christ, just to see what I could find out. And the cool thing about it is I found out quite a few things that are really interesting. Is, for example, Jerusalem has another moniker. It's also called the City of David. And the reason why it's called the City of David is because back in the 10th century BC, David conquered a group of people called the Jebusites. And when he conquered the Jebusites, that's when he conquered Jerusalem. And as a result of conquering Jerusalem, he really liked that city so much, he decided to make that city the cultural center of Jerusalem. So it was the cultural center, it was the religious center, it was like the spiritual center, political center. Like it was basically Israel's Washington, D.C., for them, just to kind of give you a picture. Like it was, everything really came out of and was built out of Jerusalem. They anticipate that back at that time, the population would have been between 25 and 50,000 people, which is kind of significant for a city, back at that time. However, Jerusalem was also a place of pilgrimage because of the fact that the temple was in Jerusalem, at that time. And so what would happen is for religious high holy days and, those kind of things, people would do a pilgrimage to come into Jerusalem. So the population would fluctuate tremendously based on the amount of people that were coming into the city to be able to have the opportunity to be able to worship God during this. And so there would be like encampments and stuff that were built for people to be able to stay in that were coming out for these holy days. And so the population would increase significantly. It was composed of two areas. There was one area called the upper city. There's another part called the lower city. The upper city was where you had like the dignitaries would live, people who were financially well off would live in those areas. And then you had the lower city. The lower city would be where people who were struggling more financially would kind of live, in that part of the city. The temple was the temple was closer to the upper city, but the poor would be able to still go and be able to worship and adore God, in this place as well. And then of course, the center of it was the temple. Like that was the place of adoration. That was the place of worship. And the interesting thing about the temple is the original temple that was built by Solomon was destroyed by the Babylonians when they came in, and then they rebuilt the temple during a time of like Nehemiah or Ezra. They rebuilt the temple. And then when Herod came in, Herod, built the temple and then built it like even larger, grander, that kind of thing. But it really was. It was a place where people would go and show up and worship. So this was the center. So Jerusalem, so what I'm picturing, so it would make sense. Like if this is the center of Israel, where everything is birthed out of it, this is a place where people would go. Then if that was it, then wouldn't it make sense for Jesus to be born there? Because think about the mission of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, it says, "And she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." That's his mission. That's incredible when you think about it that way. So it would make sense that if Jesus Christ is going to save the people from their sins, then he would show up in Jerusalem. But he doesn't. In Micah chapter 5, verse 2, it says, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, are only a small village among all the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel whose origins are in a distant past will come from you on my behalf. So realize that this prophecy about the coming Messiah was done 700 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Now here's the thing that's really interesting about this is, all that talk, and then also Jerusalem was about 4 acres in size at that point. So just to give you a picture, it was about 2.5 times the size of Disneyland. So you can have a reference for that. So again, I talked about this book, right? Jerusalem. It had 5.5 pages on Jerusalem at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. So you would think the city that Jesus would be born in, Bethlehem, would have a write-up in here too. So Jerusalem, like I said, takes up 5.5 pages. Bethlehem, during the time of Jesus, not even a paragraph. That's how insignificant this little city was. Now, the one cool thing about Bethlehem is it did share the same moniker as Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was called the city of David. Bethlehem was also called the city of David. And the reason why is because they believe that that's the birthplace of David. Like that was his family was kind of in that area. He was born in that area. But as far as Bethlehem is concerned, as far as population, they believe it was less than 1,000. At that point, they also understand that back at that point, it was more of an agricultural place. So you find like wheat, barley, olive groves, that kind of thing. You would also find tons of sheep and goats. So you would see a lot of shepherding and herding, and that aspect and everything as well. But as far as a cultural center, let me give you a picture of kind of what Bethlehem may have been like. When we were in D.C., I went to go pick up our Thanksgiving meal because we ordered it from, for those of you that may not know my family, we took a vacation. We went to D.C. for Thanksgiving. So on Thanksgiving Day, we ordered our food from Whole Foods Market. I want to tell you, it actually wasn't too bad. So if you're like, dude, I don't feel like cooking, order from Whole Foods Market, actually really good. And they didn't pay me to say that. So I'm standing there, and I went to go pick up our food, and so I'm standing there, and the girl that's behind the desk, she goes, so where are you from? And I said, I'm from Torrance, California. And she went, I said, it's a suburb of Los Angeles. And she goes, oh, Los Angeles. Oh, that kind of thing. So that's kind of like what Bethlehem was. Now, Bethlehem was about 6 miles south of Jerusalem, just to kind of give you a picture of that as well. But again, it was in the world's eyes, because we might think Torrance is significant, but in the world's eyes, people aren't killing to come to Torrance, to see our civic center. It's not. And that's not to put down our city. I love our city. But that's kind of the idea. So if we wanted to do something significant in the world, right? Would it be more impactful if I came from Los Angeles or if I came from Torrance? Right? Los Angeles, at least the identification there. So mentally, it would just make sense if God. But here's the thing that's really interesting as you begin to read through the scriptures, and it's the point that I think is really important for us to understand, is that God does not see things the way that we see them. He doesn't. So again, I just want to remind us, Matthew 1:21, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So like I said, from the standpoint of logic, it just makes sense. It seems like Jesus would be from Jerusalem. But I talked about this last week, and for those of you that may not have been here, I wanted to share this again, is we went to a museum in Washington, D.C., and when we were there, we saw a Da Vinci. And it's one of the only Da Vincis that are here in America. And Heidi was standing in front of this Da Vinci painting, and it like brought tears to her eyes. Like it was, it was like it would be like me seeing Baker Mayfield from the Buccaneers. It was just a moment. It just brought tears to her. I probably wouldn't cry for Baker, but I just wanted to give you an idea of it. So I asked her this question: as we're walking through, I said, as an artist, because I don't know what to look for. So I said, as an artist, when you look at a portrait or painting, what is it that you look for? And so she talked to me a little bit about like brush strokes. She talked about color usage, color theory. She talked about lighting and the usage of that. And so I did. So from that point forward, whenever I would go to a portrait in the museum, I would go, okay, I'm looking at the lighting, okay, the use of color. Oh, look at the detail. And I was able to start to see things a little bit different as a result of it. And I was able to kind of appreciate it more as a result of it. And so what I'm saying is this, and you can see this next point on the stage. Life's miracles unfold when you see as God sees. Life's miracles unfold when you see as God sees. So let's learn how to begin to do that. So how does God see? How does God see? Well, there's this guy named Samuel. He's given his job, and the job is to pick the next king of Israel. And he walks into this guy's house, and he sees a kid named Eliab. And he looks at him and goes, ooh, that's got to be the guy. That's got to be the guy. And I don't know what it was in Eliab that Samuel thought, maybe it was just like his, I don't know if it was like his walk or there was something regal about him. Like, if that's a king, that's what a king looks, that has to be the guy. And God was like, no, that's not. Actually, it's his teenage brother is out in the field that they didn't even bother to bring in the house when you were thinking about picking. It's that guy. And then when you look at the lineage of Jesus Christ, there are some things in there that just doesn't make sense. Because Jesus Christ is holy, right? He's holy. So you would think his lineage would be holy as well. But yet you look in and, his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was a prostitute. And you go, ooh, that's interesting. Another story of his past, or of his ancestry, is there's this guy, his name is Judah, and his son marries a woman, and the son dies. And back then, the rule was if your son married a woman and your son died, then you gave him to the next son, because the goal was to try to keep the line of your family going. So you would give him to the next son. So he gave the daughter named Tamar, he gave her, the daughter-in-law, to the next son, and the next son dies. And so she goes to him like, okay, I guess I'm ready for your next son. And he's like, hold your horses, honey. And so he doesn't. But again, he has a responsibility for the lineage of his family, but he fails on that. So then what happens is she dresses up as a prostitute, tricks Judah into sleeping with her, and then Judah finds out that she's pregnant, and it's like, oh, no, we're going to handle business. And she said, well, I have something from the man who impregnated me. He's like, well, let me see it. And then she pulls out receipts. And Judah's like, oh, that's me. That baby is a part of Jesus' ancestry. So we see that God uses the person that you would not expect to use, to call, that no one even thought was important enough to even bring in. He redeems that which seems irredeemable and makes it a part of the lineage of his son. And then, not only that, we look at the disciples. And the disciples weren't a group of people that you would build, that you would come together and recruit to change the world. Maybe clean it, but not change it. Completely opposite corners. You had a terrorist mixed with a person who was stolen from his own people. Guys that were insecure. But God uses them powerfully. So the thing is that I really want you to understand is when you look at the way and begin to see the world as the way that God sees it, he sees things that we would think are not useful as useful, and the things that we think are most potent to being used as not useful at all. So now it makes sense why he choose Bethlehem over Jerusalem. It begins to make sense. And again, just to give you a picture, here are two passages that show you the way that he thinks. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Corinthians 1:27. Instead, God chose the things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise, and he chose things that are powerless to shame those that are powerful. So, again, God is in the work at unexpected places. So it's important that we not put God in this and think, God, this is the way that I expect you to work. That we begin to look outside of the box to be able to say, okay, God, help me to see as you see so that I can begin to see you at work. And it's interesting, after going over this sermon this morning, my drive to church was a little bit different. It really was. As I was driving here, I noticed there was a tree that was on my path. Well, not in my path, but on my path. And there was a tree, and I kind of saw it blowing. And I was like, God, you're at work. There was a guy out walking his dog, kind of thing. And, he called the dog to sit down, and the dog sat and just kind of stayed there. And then they walked together. And I was like, God, you're at work. That's what I'm hoping to do as a result of the message today, is for us to say, God, let me look at the menial things, the small things, so I can see how you're at work and trust you in every single element of my life. Trust you in every single element of my life. It says this in Psalm 46, verses 9 through 11. He causes wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. But be still and know that I am God. See, here's the thing. This God here, the one that is grandiose and does incredible miracles, because he does do that, but the problem is, to see this, I don't have to be still, right? I don't have to be still to watch God work if this is the only way that he works. So why be still? Why be still? I went to the beach once, and as I was standing on the beach, I kind of looked out, and then I closed my eyes. And I remember feeling a breeze that I wasn't aware of before. And I remember hearing birds that were off at a distance that I hadn't noticed before. And there were kids that were playing. And then a drunk guy threw up behind me. But there were things that I hadn't, and I wouldn't have noticed. Now, I want to make this really clear, though, because I think sometimes when people think, be still and know that I am God, people think that means Well, what are you doing? I'm being still, and I'm knowing that he's God. Well, don't you need a job? Yeah, I know, but I'm being still, and I know that he's God. Well, shouldn't you go out and do applications and apply? Oh, he'll provide. So I want to make this really clear. Be still and know that I am God does not mean be lazy and know that I am God. Deny responsibility and know that I am God. You know what it means? It's like the scripture says that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. So what would he do? He'd pause. He'd pause. But then he would still come back and he would do the work of his Father. So I think it's important for us to understand that when it comes to faith and our trusting and relying and depending on God and who he is, that it doesn't mean that I'm lazy. It just means that I take a moment and I slow down to reflect on who he is and to reflect on, God, show me, are there ways that you are at work that I just am not seeing right now? The Hebrew word for there is Rapha. Everybody said that. Rapha. Rapha. You know. And what it means is, and I love this, and I put it on here. It says, literally means to relax, to let go, to cease, to be weak, to be idle. It means I stop. I stop. For a moment. When things are getting out of hand in a sports game, what do they do? They call a timeout. See, TJ even he hates sports ball. Okay, but yeah, they call it timeout. Why is it that when we get overwhelmed, we get busier? And then we wonder, God, why aren't you at work? So we never take a time out. Now, timeout, is it like timeout, does that end the game? No. You take a timeout, regather yourself, and then get back into the game. So I just want to encourage you with that and understanding that. There's a commentary that I use for my messages sometimes. It's called BibleHub.com. And here's what they said about Rapha, and I wanted you guys to be able to read that. It'll be on screen. The Hebrew verb Rapha primarily conveys the idea of slackening or letting go. It can imply physical relaxation or weakness, as well as a metaphorical sense of ceasing from activity or effort. In various contexts, it means to be still, to desist, or to become idle. The term is often used to describe a state of rest or a cessation of striving, sometimes in a positive sense of trusting in God and ceasing from one's own what? Efforts. Be still and know that I am God. And maybe, just maybe, what that will do is it will cause us to be able to see, like, God, I thought you didn't care. But now I see that you do. And I see that you are at work. And then what you begin to do is you begin to look for even little victories. Even little victories. You're in an argument with your husband or your wife, getting on your nerves. And little victory might be they come over and kiss you on the cheek before they leave to go to work. And you think, God, you're still in this marriage. You'd have to be, because I would have knocked them out. But you know what I mean? You start looking for little victories. Your boss is getting on your nerve, but you show up at work and you sit down and you get a phone call from a client. And it's exactly what you needed to hear at that moment. Client has no idea what you're dealing with, what you're going through, but they just happen to say something. Learn to look for God, not just in the grandiose, but look for him in the small. Don't make the same mistake that the people at the time of Jesus made, where they missed him because he did not come expecting them to. So at Encounter, we encourage you to love God, love others, and love yourself. So we say love up. So here's what I want to encourage you with loving up today. Believe in a God who works outside the box, and give him the freedom to be able to do that. Believe in a God who works outside the box, and give him the freedom to be able to do that. Love out. Share the message of the God of the small. A lot of people don't hear that, do they? And so as a result, how many people have walked away from faith because they were looking for the God of the grandiose and they missed the God of the small? And then finally, love in. Learn to be still and know and allow God the freedom to work. Learn to be still and allow God the freedom to work. God, I thank you.